Hello, thanks for tuning in to this initial video overview of the AKAI Professional MPC Touch, which I have here in front of me. It's a new piece of kit to me. I've only had it for 3 days, so this is very much initial impressions rather than a complete review or an extensive interface review. As background, I've never owned any AKAI kit. In fact, I've never really owned any beat making kit either, so I don't know any of the machines or the variety of other AKAI MPCs that have come in the past. I do have an Arturia BeatStep Pro, which I've had for about 4 or 5 months, which is my first intro to beat making, and I use Ableton. So you may see me twiddle this knob here, and that's just a volume track in Ableton, which I'm using from this MIDI fighter twister from DJ Tech Tools, and that's just going to allow me to turn the volume up and down. Otherwise, you won't be able to hear me talk. So here's an initial overview. In terms of size, I come from a background of using a lot of these Korg bits of kits and pieces in the Volca range, and you can see the 7-inch screen on the AKAI is just a little bit smaller than the size of a Volca sample. And I'll pop that away. The actual hardware itself, if anybody's familiar with the laptop world, where you may use a laptop in a business and want to be able to just stick it down on your desktop, plug in a monitor, keyboard, mouse and all of the peripherals. There are devices called port extenders, and essentially this is how this works, because those port extenders allow you to connect an external monitor, USB, various other peripherals, even many of them include a sound card as well inside the port replicator. And that's what they've kind of done here, which is very good use of technology as far as I can see, because anything they want to develop on the screen, they can do that without having to release new firmware or any other bits of equipment, or hardware upgrades, because it can all be done in the software. And this is just essentially a shared screen. In fact, you can use the screen. I could have this is my desktop extended onto here and move my mouse around and everything I wanted to. But for me, in terms of the installation and setup, I'm quite happy that this is just used for the MPC software. But the option is there during the setup to use this as a desktop extension as well if you want to do that. However, I think it's a great idea because I always work with my computer on my Mac running anyway, so the fact this extends the desktop tools works for me. So that's my first point. In terms of the hardware, it's got that kind of rubberized feel to the paintwork, and I don't think that's a good idea. Although it's it feels great in terms of its ruggedness and its rubberizedness. I did notice within 2 hours of using it that I'd smeared marks. You could see the marks on it. They provide a cloth actually for cleaning the screen, although it's mainly been the case that I've left marks on, where I've been sort of holding onto the side. The pads are really nice and very sensitive, so if I go quiet for a moment, I will do some bits and pieces on the pad so you can hear them. So I'll just stop that track, and I'm in the main home view where I can see the mix of different sequences that I've put together. If I pick on here a track that I've got that's got the beat on it, I know I've got a house kit assigned to the pads, and up on this side they have the pad bank, and I'm going to use bank A, which tends to have all of the drum kits, if they're the pre-made drum kits that come in the pack. In fact, they give you 20 gigs of various bits of data. They tend to have them pre-assigned. So if I turn the volume up, you'll hear it, but you won't hear me talk. Yeah, so you can sort of hear how quiet you can go with a little touch, right up to much firmer. So they're great anyway. I mean, the black rubber, again, it seems to be picking up a lot of bits of stuff. Mind you, I've got a dog, so we have a lot of like dog fur floating around and dust in the house, so which is a bit annoying. But because they're black, they're picking that up. Say I have a BeatStep Pro, which has the kind of white buttons, and you just can't see the dust on them. I can see a dog hair instantly already on there, very fine one. So yeah, they're very thick. They're much bigger than I thought they'd be, because I've been used to using smaller Korg Volkers and other sort of jam boxes, which tend to have the sort of smaller groove boxes even, that have the smaller pads. But I have been impressed, definitely impressed by the quality. Although obviously I don't know about longevity because I've only had it for 3 days. Right, so over then to the project screen, and this is something in 3 days I've had a really sharp learning curve on, because I haven't used MPC before. So I'm still picking up how this operates. Right, so essentially you've got a set of sequences at the top, and this is on the main home screen. You can bring up the main menu at any time. So there I can see all the various different menus that they've got presented, which is kind of a quick way of moving around. Go to main, that's where you see your sequence at the top, the track, and then the program below, which is the instruments you've got assigned. And on this particular one, I'm on sequence 12 because I've been sort of playing around, and I'd worked out where I was by the time I got to about 12 sequences, which I've been playing with. And then the first track I've got in there is a sort of a beat going. Now, an easier way to see your various tracks is this one, and it shows you the actual sequences with the tracks individually, so you can sort of mute them on and off. So if I start the play, so you can see there I just muted on and off this. In fact, it was a piano, even though I've said it's bass guitar, and I've spelled bass as B-A-S-E. But I have a piano running on that one, and I have a guitar running on track 1, and then the basic beat is running on this track. And so what I found, which is really good, because I haven't used MPC before, is just the ease of layering. So I tend to just leave things playing, and it's quite a creative way of doing it. I then just layer on a bit of extra music. Well, when I say music, I layer on a few extra pad presses and work out how it fits together depending on the actual track and how it sort of builds up. So I'll show you an example of doing that. If I just increase the volume again, and then I'll mute out the track 3, which is that sort of piano bit. Okay, so that piano section is muted out, and then I'll show you how easy it is to create another one if you're experimenting. So I'll create a new track, and what I'll do first of all is I haven't named that track yet, and it's really easy to do that right here. So, oops, I didn't pin that one. Actually I did, that's what I wanted. So right at the top, I know that's that piano, and I'll just call it Mark 1. So that's really nice and quick. Then actually hit that one again. I'll tell you what I'll do is I'll just go down to a new unused slot, and it's still using that grand piano here because the program is still the same. I'll give it another name. So I'll call it Piano Mark II. And just check. So when this is actually a plug-in rather than these fixed wave instruments that they allow you, and when you pick these plugins, what they tend to be is the lower octaves tend to be right down on the pad bank A, and then you work up to the higher pad banks for the higher notes. So just so you can hear that instrument on its own. And so you get a nice sort of feel for how you can sort of sustain the note by holding the pad down, and a gentle touch as well. Right, obviously that's not as important when you're pounding out like a main sort of R&B kind of beat, but it's nice to know that as a piece of equipment you can do that subtle stuff if you're doing sort of melodies and you want to be really sensitive on the pads. You can do that. Now one thing here, obviously I've got the notes available to me, but I much prefer when I'm using that kind of instrument to use the pad perform. So basically all I did there was go to the main menu with the home button at the top, and then from there went to pad perform, and straight off the chords are now available, and you can select the octaves and various other details on this left hand side. So you can play those on here as well. And you know, for me I was looking for something a little bit deeper than that, so actually I can go down an octave, and this is where the data wheel comes in. You can use that whenever it's context sensitive, which means whenever you're on a particular section it will move it. So while I'm on the scale and octave, I can move that up and down there. So that's a bit more than what I was after. And then for recording, I know that you kind of have to store it in your head, and this is where something I think they could improve greatly with the software. They could tell me what program and track I'm on at the top here somewhere, because at the moment I'm having to store that in my biological brain stem. However, if they were kind enough to update the software, they should really, even though I've gone to that pad perform, show me the tracks and other details that I'm on, almost like a, you know, like when you go to websites and you get things follow you around, so you always know where you are, even though you're on a different section of the page. That would be fantastic, because when I'm switched out, I've forgotten, other than the fact, of course, I know I've got the piano there. I've now have to go back and go, oh, okay, yeah, I know I'm 100% sure I'm on track 4, where I'm doing a fill or something like that. So escaping from there, back to pad perform. Of course, hitting play, that plays my sequence in the background, and then you can kind of jam, because you don't have to hit the record straight away. Yes, you don't have to hit record straight away. You could just play in the background. So I'll try some sort of playing around, and you can see the sensitivity of the pads over that track. So if I think I've got something I want to record, you can either go straight onto overdub And now that's just record whatever I put in, so I'll show you. So that's actually gone in okay. So, however, if you were jamming and then you did a piece and it didn't work for you, you can just hit undo and it's gone. And the overdub is still on, so I can just go in again. So if you weren't happy with that and you wanted to make a change to that, you can go into the grid view, and this is where you can see my playing there. It's also lighting up the pads in sequence with what is appearing on the screen. You can go into the selector and go OK. I'll just select that last section and you can nudge it. So if nudge is on, again, context sensitive data wheel, I can move it back. Okay, so I've just lined that up into the actual beat on there. It still sounds okay. Obviously I can shift it back. So again, that's now sounding like it's coming in too early. Pop it back. But you can find nudge. So at the moment while it's nudging, it's snapping. But you hit the little button there, don't snap. I don't know if shift does it as well. No, shift doesn't do it. You hit don't snap. And I can pull it back, just the little nudges at a time. Okay, so that's nudge, but you can also edit the end to extend out. It's not necessarily, I mean, if you had a short sample drum hit, obviously extending the length of the note doesn't make a big deal to it, depending on what you're doing in terms of how long that sample is. Okay, so now I've selected the beat. I can see on pad 5 that I've got a hit. Just put the volume up. Switch down to this view, which is the sequence view where you can see the velocity and you can increase that. So there you can see my hits for this particular pad 5 coming in. So I've turned on the pad select, you can see that it's green highlighted on this one. Okay, so this becomes a grid and you can see here you can add in that extra beat. When you're on this screen, you can increase the velocity of that hit. Yep, so slightly heavier strike. So this is it's essentially it's grid based sort of sequencing when you're on this screen, and you can move through the bars. Another touch that I'm sure will come when they develop things, but I don't want to have to go here to move on to the next bar. I think that's a bit fiddly. I think a big plus and minus, which at the moment puts the max or lowest velocity on that selected sequence point. But for me, it would be nicer to have a big pad just to move forward onto the next bar, because once you're doing something with a few bars in, you don't want to necessarily just press this tiny button. That's just an observation. So now if I go back to the project, when you change between the sequence, you can get it to, it automatically waits until it's finished playing that sequence and that track before it moves on to the next one. So just I'll give you that example because I copied this phase 1 into 2 other phases, 2 and 3, and when I move between, you'll see it waits before it gets to the end of the play. So just an example really of a feature I quite like, which is it's different from the mute and on mute. Obviously I'm changing track and I do want it to start at the beginning of a sequence, but there is another view, this one, when you can see all of your tracks lined up, and this is where you can sort of mute and unmute them. So what I'll do now is I'll put the volume back up on the track, and then I'll just go in and mute and unmute the different pieces I've done on there. So I've just hit solo, and that's solo track 7, which is this bright pad, which is kind of a background ambient sound. Just bring in the beat again. I think a section like this would be quite fun if you were doing a live performance, because obviously within here you could have loops running as well. Obviously these are looping, but they're not long looped waves, they're just individual instruments I've played. But if you did have looped sequences, you could sort of mix them live. The only thing I'd say is I think this screen could be improved by having a mute that was a gradual mute, or a method to bring a track in time rather than it just coming in the instant you unmute, so that it could like maybe start at the end of the track, just like when moving between the sequences worked. Again, just a reminder, I'm not familiar with MPC software. I've only had this a few days, so there may be something out there that can do it, but I'd really like the screen to be extended. I mean, it's not physically extended, but to squeeze everything up a bit and give me like an unmute that was a choice of either kicking in straight away or coming in at the end or the start of the track, or even an unmute that was a slider control one as well. Obviously I've got level here. I mean, you could manually do that, So if I increase it, so obviously the Q links aren't on there in that level control. I mean, it's working. I think it's working. Oh no, it wasn't working. Oh, there we go. So there you go, I can bring the level in, but I'd like that to slide in automatically with maybe a button, rather than it immediately leaping up to maximum level when you unmute. That's another thing that just occasionally you can get when you scroll up and down. You can end up with, say, that's done it there now. Even though I sort of made a positive move, my mute button's hidden. You probably can't see it that clearly, but it's just hidden underneath the bottom, and I have to kind of go back and try a little bit harder and just check that I've got the guitar there. So now what I'll do is I'll go to my sort of favourite screen again, which is this pad perform. So there we go. So now if I wanted to do some jamming, I'll just show you again the use of the pads. Something you like in a pattern, hit the overdub, or if you then hit play start, it will count you in. I'm going to undo that, start fresh. So thanks very much for listening in to what was just an initial overview. I've only had it for a few days, still picking it up. I like it so far. I like that I can be quite creative in layering on tracks, and that's probably the most important thing to me, in that I start out with maybe a beat or even a lead sequence that I'm sort of playing and jamming out, and then start to layer in things and get into the groove with it, really. And that's been working well for me the first few days. A few little items like menu bits and pieces. I mean, another thing I'd like to see is that when you select an instrument from the list, a plugin, the scroll list is quite difficult to track, particularly with ones like this where they seem to reset the number count on the instruments. So you're sort of scrolling thinking you're at point 15, 16, and suddenly it's back to 0, 1 again, and you're, am I at the top of the list? Am I halfway through? And I'll tell you what, that would be great, is if they put an extra menu item down there to favourite those. Just one little click, favourite, and it put it to the top of the list, and bosh, you'd be able to get to exactly what you wanted. So, yeah, bits and pieces that could do with improvement, but I think they've done a great job for the launch of this product, and that it integrates well with their desktop software as well. So, yeah, good stuff so far. I'll be back in probably 4 to 6 weeks once I've been a bit more creative with it and learnt the ins and outs, got to grips with tracks and recording. Okay, thanks for listening in. Goodbye.